I arrived at the office at 7:04 a.m., same as I had every weekday for the past 17 years. The marble floors of NorthAxis Technologies' Toronto headquarters reflected the dull gray of the October sky outside. The elevators were still slow that early in the morning, and I didn't mind. I liked the silence. It gave me time to think. My ID badge beeped like always. No change, no warning, nothing to suggest that this would be my last walk through those glass doors. I took the elevator to the 12th floor, nodded at the cleaning crew, and entered the IT wing. The lights were already on in my office. That was unusual. My nameplate was still there. Elliot Fraser, Senior Systems Architect. 17 years, 3 office moves. 2 rebrands, 1 man who never left. I walked in to find Claudia from HR sitting in one of my guest chairs, eyes fixed on her company-issued tablet. Standing beside her, not meeting my eye, was Travis McAllister, our new CEO, young, ambitious, always looking just past the people in front of him. Elliot, he began, his voice clipped corporate. Due to ongoing restructuring efforts, your position has been eliminated, effective immediately. He paused. Please return your badge and clear your workspace by noon. I looked at Claudia. She didn't flinch. She simply slid a white envelope across the desk toward me. Inside was a termination letter and a basic severance agreement. No performance issues, no allegations, just cold language and a signature that didn't tremble. I didn't argue, didn't ask why, I simply nodded once. Understood, I said, and I meant it, but not the way they thought. Travis gave a stiff nod and walked out without waiting for a response. Claudia stood, murmured something about payroll transition, and followed. I sat down slowly in my own chair for what would be the last time. The clock read 7:39 a.m. by 9:15. The office was fully alive. I'd started packing my things deliberately, methodically. One framed photo of Margaret and I during our Jasper hiking trip. One ceramic mug that read, "Don't talk to me until I've debugged you," a gag gift from the security team last Christmas. My old BlackBerry, now a desk weight. The small bonsai tree I'd nursed for over a decade, its roots clinging to the soil more loyally than some people clung to this company. A few of the younger analysts peered at me through their dual monitors. Some whispered, most avoided eye contact. I didn't blame them. They'd been trained by me, mentored by me, but fear keeps people quiet, especially in corporate corridors. The silence of others is the first betrayal. At 11:20, I made one last pass through my shared network folder. Nothing confidential, nothing I wasn't supposed to have access to, at least not anymore. But it was there, plain as day. My admin status had been quietly revoked 3 weeks ago. I hadn't even noticed. They had prepared this long before today. I logged out, encrypted my last local backup, and sent myself a final email, a simple memo to self labeled closure. It contained no attachments, just a single line. They think I'm gone, but the system still speaks my name. As I walked to the elevator, I passed Travis again. He stood near the glass wall, arms folded, pretending to check his phone. His eyes flicked up at me for half a second, then back down. No words, no handshake, just surveillance. As if I might sabotage something, as if I hadn't been the one keeping the system alive for nearly 2 decades. I smiled inwardly. He had no idea what I'd already built. Outside, the cold Toronto wind bit through my jacket. I held my box close as I crossed Front Street, the CN Tower looming behind me like a silent sentinel. My car was parked in a side lot. I sat for a few moments in the driver's seat, letting the heater blow warmth into my hands. Across the street, the NorthAxis building gleamed under the autumn sun. Tall, glassy, oblivious. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Tired eyes, steady jaw. The face of someone who'd spent too long being loyal to people who never truly saw him. I reached under the passenger seat, pulled out a slim leather case, and unzipped it. Inside was a hard drive, 256 GB air-gapped, time-stamped, my personal mirror of everything I'd ever built, architecture maps, old protocols, even the original access hierarchy from 2012, legal back then, forgotten now. They'd asked me to build redundancies to anticipate crises to protect the company from itself. I had done all of that and kept a version for myself. Not out of malice, out of habit, because systems only survive if someone remembers how they were built. I started the car, the city moved around me. People rushing to meetings, holding paper cups of coffee, talking about efficiency and synergy. I drove past them all. I wasn't angry, I wasn't sad, I was awake. More than I had been in years. Travis had taken my job, but he hadn't taken what I knew. What I remembered, what I had built when no one else paid attention. They had ended my employment. But they had also triggered the part of me that never forgot a single line of code or betrayal, and deep down I knew Monday might have been theirs. But Wednesday would be mine. 3 days after the termination, I left the city, not because I was hiding, but because I needed the quiet to hear what the systems hadn't said aloud. Our cabin in Muskoka sat nestled between late autumn trees, their orange leaves drifting like slow-thought confessions. Margaret had driven up ahead of me the day before. She knew I'd need space, not comfort. When I arrived, the windows were lit. The kettle was warm, but she didn't say much. She just kissed my temple, handed me a mug of tea, and disappeared upstairs. That's love, the kind that doesn't ask questions until you're ready to speak. By morning, the lake was covered in a thin skin of fog. I booted up my old laptop, one I hadn't connected to the office network in over a year, and inserted the encrypted drive I'd carried out with me. Not the one I showed. HR, not the one Travis thought I left with. This one was older, deeper, more honest. A personal repository of architecture maps, user permission timelines, and behavioral access logs. Things no one else thought were important anymore. But I did. Especially now, I started with the access reports. The system had logs dating back to 2015, unchanged in format, untouched in 7 years, except for one file. It had been modified 3 months ago by someone using a temporary admin token. That caught my attention. Tokens don't get issued lightly, and they don't expire quietly unless someone wants them to. I pulled up the metadata and froze. The modification was tied to an IP address registered inside the corporate VPN. Not strange in itself, but the user ID, it wasn't mine. It wasn't anyone from IT either. It belonged to Sebastian Cho, our so-called digital transformation consultant. Sebastian had only been with us for 6 months before I was let go. A sleek, fluent, LinkedIn-certified innovator with a Stanford degree, and the charm of someone who'd never stayed long enough to deal with the messes he made. I remembered how he'd breezed through our onboarding with a smug smile and a dozen buzzwords Travis had introduced him in a meeting as our key to unlocking next-gen scalability. At the time, I'd made a note in my head, watch him. Not for what he said, but for what he didn't ask. He never once requested the legacy infrastructure documentation, never wanted the full map of our back-end system, which spanned nearly a decade of patches, overrides, and invisible handshakes between modules that only I truly understood. Instead, he asked for something else. Finance system access. Margaret stepped into the room mid-morning. "You've been staring at that screen for 2 hours," she said softly. I looked up, blinking. I didn't notice. She placed a warm hand on my shoulder. "Do you know what you're looking for?" "Not yet," I replied. "But I'll know it when I see it." I ran a script I'd built years ago to flag inconsistencies in access logs, normally used to catch interns poking into files they shouldn't, but this time it flagged a sequence of events from early September. Sebastian had accessed the user permissions module. 3 minutes later, Graham Wilkins, the CFO, signed off on a set of standard financial escalations, authorizing recurring payments to a vendor called BrightStone Analytics. I paused. BrightStone, I'd never heard of them. I dug into the vendor list. Their incorporation number matched a recent edition dated only 14 months ago. Their mailing address, a shared mailbox in a co-working space in Scarborough. No office, no phone number, just a shell. That night, I skipped dinner. Margaret didn't ask. She just left a plate by the fireplace still warm, just in case I stayed in the study, and pulled every invoice issued to BrightStone license renewals, infrastructure audits, optimization reports, all vague, all expensive, and all approved by Graham. At 11:03 p.m., I cross-referenced BrightStone's federal registration data. The listed primary contact was Lucas Cho. The surname wasn't uncommon, but the coincidence was too large to ignore. I dug deeper. On LinkedIn, Lucas Cho was listed as a startup advisor and entrepreneur with connections to several minor fintech groups. One of his endorsements, Sebastian Cho. His older brother. I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. This wasn't just corporate negligence. This was a deliberate, structured funneling of company funds, masked as modernization, and led by people who had no idea how fragile our systems truly were. I opened a notepad and began a new log. Phase 1. Access manipulation by consultant. Phase 2. Vendor creation via CFO. Phase 3. Legacy system deactivation. Phase 4. Eliminate oversight, i.e. me. I didn't get angry. I didn't shout. I just kept writing. Because the thing about digital footprints is, they never vanish. Not when someone like me built the floor they're walking on. As the clock neared midnight, I clicked Save All and encrypted the folder under a new name. Integrity. V10. Margaret appeared in the doorway, holding 2 mugs. You found something, didn't you? I nodded. I think I just confirmed why they wanted me gone. She walked over, handed me a mug, and sat beside me in silence. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the trees. Inside, I began outlining a response, not for them, not yet, but for myself. For the record, because the next move wouldn't be loud. It would be surgical. Sebastian Cho didn't blink much. I noticed that early on. He was the kind of man who could maintain eye contact for just long enough to seem sincere, but not long enough for you to see through him. I remembered the first time we met 6 months before my termination. Travis had brought him in, with the enthusiasm of a child unveiling a new toy. Sebastian's joining us to lead the modernization initiative Travis had announced, smiling too broadly. He's worked with some of the fastest scaling tech firms in Europe and Southeast Asia. We're lucky to have him. The meeting room had fallen silent, the kind of hush that isn't respect, but calculation. Sebastian stood at the front of the room in a charcoal suit, no tie, a single silver ring on his right hand. He talked fast, fluent, polished. He spoke of agile transitions, streamlined redundancies, and cloud-first cost pivots. A cascade of buzzwords. What struck me most was what he didn't mention, the existing infrastructure. Our legacy systems, the custom-built frameworks that I had designed and updated for more than a decade. He never asked me for access to those, never reviewed the documentation I'd offered. 3 months after his arrival, our team meetings changed. No more printouts. No more questions from Travis about back-end stability. The focus shifted to dashboards, KPIs, burn charts, and funding rounds. I began noticing anomalies, login attempts from locations that didn't match our standard VPN behavior file trees, reorganized without change, logs, approval chains, rerouted. It wasn't chaos, it was elegant. Almost too clean, like someone had wiped their feet before stepping into someone else's code. Back in Muskoka with logs open and silence all around, I started tracing each anomaly backward. I built a chain event, logs, timestamps. administrative overrides, patterns emerged. They all pointed to a single escalation node, an internal tool designed for consultant-level access. A tool that hadn't been used since 2018. Until now, I cross-checked that token against the metadata the access had been granted on a Friday evening, signed off by Graham Wilkins. The next morning, Sebastian had run 3 silent queries on our financial databases. I paused, opened my encrypted folder. Inside was a secondary archive, older but complete. I had kept logs from an audit initiative back in 2019, part of a government compliance test for handling protected data. One file in particular stood out. Vendor onboarding process PDF. It outlined the full procurement protocol, background checks, multiple internal approvals. Formal bidding. I knew from memory that BrightStone Analytics had bypassed at least 3 of those steps. I pulled up BrightStone's registry again, Scarborough address, registered contact, Lucas Cho. The surname alone wasn't enough, but LinkedIn filled in the blanks. Lucas's profile was vague, almost suspiciously minimal, but it linked to 3 endorsements from Sebastian, including one tagged trusted advisor, infrastructure scaling. And then there was the photo, the 2 of them at a fintech networking event in Vancouver. Brothers confirmed. I kept digging Lucas's company. BrightStone had no active website, no job listings, no office phone. But its invoice numbers tracked perfectly with our internal procurement logs. Each submission was spaced exactly 29 days apart, just shy of triggering audit alerts that fire at monthly intervals. The invoices themselves were padded with consulting jargon, architecture, alignment, redundancy, advisory, multi-cloud evaluation, terms that look legitimate on paper but mean nothing when unverified, and none of the deliverables could be located in our internal system. It was a ghost company, founded, fed, and funded by NorthAxis, under the careful choreography of Sebastian and Graham. I documented everything: screenshots, time logs, server traces. I built a visual flowchart from Graham's approvals to Sebastian's access modifications, to BrightStone's payments. Then I built a second chart, comparing Travis's budget cuts to IT with the matching spikes in consulting fees. Every time our department's budget dropped, BrightStone's invoice rose. And always, Sebastian was the middleman. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was angry, I'd moved past anger. What I felt now was precision, a calm, focused necessity to finish this. Like I would a broken system diagnose, contain, rebuild. Margaret found me at the kitchen table at 2:30 a.m. sketching audit maps on a yellow notepad. She said nothing, just poured coffee and sat across from me. "He smiled too much," I said after a long silence. She raised an eyebrow. "The consultant." I clarified Sebastian. He smiled like someone who thought he already owned the ending. I looked up at her. "But the thing about systems," I said. "They remember before dawn, I started building the final piece. A compiled dossier, encrypted in 2 layers, designed to be sent to multiple recipients with a single trigger. But not yet. Not until the right time. Not until they were so certain of their immunity that the ground would feel solid just before I pulled it out from under them." By 6 a.m. I had labeled the file, BrightStone Sequence V Final. I saved it to a separate drive, wrapped it in plastic, and placed it inside the lining of my suitcase. Then I returned to bed for 2 hours of sleep, calm, ready. Not for revenge, for revelation. Friday, 7th, 58 a.m. I sat tucked into the far corner of a cafe on King Street West, the kind of place where everyone wore headphones but heard everything. My laptop glowed softly in front of me. The VPN was routed through a private node I'd configured years ago, buried under layers of encryption. I'd used it once to test phishing vulnerabilities on our own staff, an internal drill with a mock domain I'd quietly built that mimicked NorthAxis's email system. No one had ever flagged it. I called it the ethical backdoor. Today it was open again for one final message. Up on the 42nd floor of NorthAxis Technologies, the board of directors was gathering for their quarterly financial meeting. The agenda: performance reviews, fiscal summaries, and end-of-year bonus approvals. I didn't need insider access to know that I was the one who had helped implement the internal calendaring system. I knew how those meetings flowed, right down to the blueberry scones they ordered in bulk. At exactly 8:00 a.m. I clicked. Send subject line before you approve. Q4 bonuses. Review urgently. The body of the email was short. No accusations, no emotional outbursts. Just a link to an attached PDF file: BrightStone report. Complete. PDF. It contained 213 pages of structured documentation. A full paper trail of internal approvals signed by CFO Graham Wilkins. Logs showing consultant Sebastian Cho accessing systems beyond his scope. Company registration data linking BrightStone Analytics to Lucas Cho. Invoice analysis mapping inflated charges to specific budget cuts in IT. Access logs showing modifications to core systems tied to Sebastian's temporary tokens. Every figure, every line item, every name was traceable. No speculation, no guesswork, just evidence. I sent the email to every board member. I CC'd Patrice Gagnon, the company's general counsel. I added the head of internal audit, and most importantly, I sent a direct copy to Oliver Chan, the only board member I trusted, the only one who used to ask technical questions during meetings instead of just nodding through PowerPoints. 8:06 a.m. Oliver opened the email. 8:11. Two more board members viewed the attachment. 8:13. A direct message from Oliver popped up. "Where are you?" I didn't answer. I wanted them to sit with it for a moment. Let the silence hang heavier than the evidence. Meanwhile, on the 42nd floor, Travis McAllister was starting his usual speech. I imagined him in his tailored suit, gesturing at graphs, talking about momentum and innovation, while the board quietly refreshed their inboxes and scanned the report I had just detonated beneath their feet. At 8:27, Graham Wilkins received a phone call. He stepped out of his office 90 seconds later, visibly pale, heading straight to the boardroom. Back in the cafe, I stirred my coffee with one hand while reading a fresh email from the legal department. Subject: cease and desist. Confidentiality reminder. A standard scare tactic they were invoking: breach of post-employment confidentiality. The irony: I'd never signed a separation agreement. I smiled, archived the email, and labeled the folder Tactics, Early Defense. At 9:02, the board meeting was paused. According to a message I later received from Stephen Lin, my former intern, now a junior analyst, Travis had asked to disable boardroom video and switch to internal discussion only. Too late. The report had already been opened on 7 devices. Copies had been saved, forwarded, annotated. At 9:19, I left the cafe through the side door. As I reached the alley, a message buzzed on my phone from Oliver. "We need to meet in person." "Today," I replied. "Not in the city. I'll send coordinates. Bring nothing corporate." By early afternoon, I was back at the cabin in Muskoka. I printed a hard copy of the report. No digital traces, no metadata. Just cold paper, ink, and truth. To 3:10 p.m., Oliver's silver SUV pulled into the gravel path. He stepped out slowly, looking 10 years older than he had the last time I'd seen him. No tie. No tablet, just his eyes and the understanding that something irreversible had begun. We didn't shake hands. I opened the door and slid the binder across the table. First page: if this is ignored, the company deserves to collapse. Oliver read in silence. When he looked up, his voice was quieter than I expected. "This isn't carelessness. This is coordinated theft." I nodded. Engineered theft. Masked as efficiency and funded by everyone who signed off blindly. We spoke for another hour. No strategy, no threat. Just the recognition of a system designed to break under its own denial. As Oliver left, he paused at the door. "You didn't do this to get your job back, did you?" I looked at him and answered plainly, "No, I did this because they built a lie over something I spent 17 years making honest. And I won't let them bury the part that mattered." He left with the file. I stayed, brewed a new pot of tea, opened the window, let the wind roll through. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I wasn't even calculating. I was just... Still, Monday was coming, and with it, the meeting where they'd have to face data they thought no longer existed. And I wouldn't need to say another word. The rain had come lightly overnight, just enough to gloss the leaves with a sheen of silver and make the air sharp with pine and wet stone. When I stepped outside at 6:30 a.m. to clear the porch, the lake was still a mirror. That's what I wanted this day, to be clear, reflective, and decisive. By mid-morning, the gravel cracked under tires, a silver SUV pulled up the winding drive, and Oliver Chan stepped out in a long charcoal coat. No driver, no assistant, no briefcase. He carried only a thin folder, and the kind of face you only wear after realizing the company you've helped steer may have been adrift far longer than you thought. We didn't exchange pleasantries. He followed me silently to the porch. Then inside I set a kettle on the stove, while he pulled a chair close to the dining table where I had laid out documents in neat, silent rows. "You had this all along?" asked, gesturing toward the audit trail, the invoices, the access logs. I nodded. "I built the system." "That built the system, I never stopped watching it." Oliver didn't respond immediately. He skimmed the headers, flipped through a few printouts, then stopped on a page that showed the access trail to the financial stack. Specifically, the escalation tokens approved by Graham, then traced back to Sebastian's first remote login. "This token," he said, tapping the page, "that was issued during a board retreat." "No one told me." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. He leaned back slowly. "They never thought you'd keep a mirror." "No," I said, pouring us both tea. "They thought I'd be grateful for the severance and disappear. They never understood that loyalty cuts both ways." Oliver took a sip, his eyes scanning the lake. "Travis is calling it a misunderstanding. Graham says the payments were approved through proper channels. Sebastian has gone silent." I pulled a sealed flash drive from my jacket and slid it across the table. "This isn't about interpretation." I said, "It's about design. BrightStone was built to extract, not to serve. Lucas Cho is Sebastian's brother. The vendor was registered 14 months ago with no team, no office, and no digital footprint beyond invoice submission. Graham signed every authorization, and Travis. He cut funding to internal systems to make room for those payments." Oliver rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Do you want them prosecuted?" I shook my head. "I want them out quietly, fully. And I want what they built dismantled before the entire company begins to rot from within." We sat in silence for several minutes. Then he asked a question that surprised me. "Did you expect this?" I looked out over the lake before answering. Not the betrayal, but the decay. Yes, I saw it when they stopped asking how things worked and started asking how to make them cheaper. When consultants were given keys to systems they didn't understand, when legacy became a dirty word. Oliver glanced at the flash drive again. "You said this isn't everything." "It's not." I stood and walked to the drawer beneath the staircase. From it, I pulled a manila envelope, thicker, heavier. Inside were physical copies of the 2019 Internal Compliance Report, the original vendor policy documentation, and the security memo I'd authored 4 years ago advising the board to require multi-layer approval for any infrastructure payments above $25,000. "They ignored this?" he asked. Travis called it legacy paranoia. Graham said it slowed innovation. Oliver exhaled. "Damn, he stood walking to the edge of the porch. "Do you want your job back, Elliot?" I shook my head. This was never about reinstatement. I built the system to protect the company. And when the system stopped protecting itself, someone had to step in. That's all this is. He turned to face me fully. "The board will meet again Monday. I'll bring this to them." "Don't bring it," I said. "Distribute it privately. 1 envelope each. No email, no soft copies, no boardroom theatrics." Oliver smiled faintly. "You never did like drama. I just prefer it when the system speaks louder than the man." As he moved toward his car, he paused again. "One last question," he said. "Why now?" I thought for a moment, then answered quietly. Because if they'd buried this 6 months later, the paper trail would be gone, the tokens would expire, the shell company would vanish, and the money recycled through advisory fees and innovation grants. I came forward now, because the integrity of NorthAxis still has a pulse. He nodded, pocketed the drive, and drove off without another word. Back inside, I poured another cup of tea and opened my journal to write a single line. He didn't flinch. That's a start. Monday was coming, but the real reckoning had already begun in a cabin by a lake in silence with paper instead of noise. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the NorthAxis building was already awake. Security badges were swiping in faster than usual. Something about the air on the 42nd floor felt different, not just tense but watched. People held coffee cups tighter. Side glances became common. Even the elevator music felt like it was holding its breath. I wasn't there. I was exactly where I needed to be, back at the cabin, in a sweater Margaret had knit for me last winter, watching the live feed of the NorthAxis investor portal. A small, quiet update had been posted at 7:48 a.m., Emergency Finance Committee session, restricted agenda. The kind of language that means someone's scrambling behind closed doors. By then, each member of the board had already received their envelope delivered by courier. No digital trail. Inside the printed version of the BrightStone report. A hand-annotated flowchart mapping the shell scheme and a short personal note from me. "This is not a grudge. This is a pattern. Correct it before it corrects you." At 8:03 a.m., I received a text from Stephen Lynn. They just called an emergency lock-in. Phones off, no laptops, everyone's confused. "You did this, didn't you?" I typed one word back. "Watch." That was all Stephen needed. That's all anyone who'd ever paid attention needed. Inside the boardroom, Travis was pacing. Oliver had already laid the evidence out on the polished oak table. There were no accusations, just questions. How did this vendor get through procurement? Why did Graham sign off on each invoice personally? Why was Sebastian granted full systems access without IT clearance? And most importantly, why was Elliot Fraser eliminated 3 weeks before the first invoice hit the $100,000 mark? By 8:41, the first denial came. Graham said the vendor had been thoroughly vetted. Oliver slid forward a printed email from 2019 where Graham himself dismissed the multi-approval policy as archaic. That was followed by a printed invoice showing the exact same consulting template used 5 times in a row. No deliverables attached. Sebastian wasn't in the room. He'd emailed at 2:14 a.m. from an airport IP address in Vancouver. "Due to urgent family matters, I won't be able to attend the finance session. Please contact me by email only. Classic consultant exit, quick, quiet, and out of jurisdiction." But it didn't matter. His access logs were louder than any explanation he could send. At 9:12, Travis tried to shift blame to the old system, calling it opaque and designed without modern transparency. That's when Oliver brought out the second binder, the original 2016 NorthAxis Infrastructure Security Blueprint authored by me. It outlined the exact red flags now sitting in their laps. All ignored. All signed off by 9:43. The interim chair of the board called a pause. 5 minutes later, Graham was escorted out quietly with a company lawyer walking 2 steps behind. The silence in the room was heavier than the evidence back in Muskoka. Margaret walked in, holding 2 mugs of tea. She set one down beside me and looked at the screen. "Are they finally listening?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "They're not just listening, they're recalculating." At 10:06 a.m., I received a secure email from Patrice Gagnon, General Counsel, Mr. Fraser. "The board would like to invite you to participate in a confidential debrief and discussion regarding the current crisis. Please confirm availability." I didn't reply. "Not yet." Instead, I forwarded it to a separate folder labeled Validation. No response required, because I wasn't interested in being brought in to fix their image. I wanted structural change. And that meant not showing up when summoned, but when ready. At 11:00 a.m., the NorthAxis homepage was updated, a quiet press release. In light of recent internal audit findings, the company has placed 2 senior executives on administrative leave pending further review. Interim measures are being coordinated to ensure operational continuity. No names, no blame, but the street read between the lines. At 11:17, I got a call from a number I hadn't seen in years. Meera Singh, a former infrastructure lead, who had left after Travis reshuffled the technical division. "Elliot," she said, skipping pleasantries. "Did you really take down the whole triangle?" I paused, then replied, "No, they built it on sand. I just removed the shade." By noon, I closed the laptop. The lake outside was still again. Margaret stood at the doorway watching me quietly. "Are you going back?" she asked. Eventually, I said, "To work." I shook my head, to set terms, because Monday didn't belong to them anymore. It belonged to the man they'd written off, locked out, and underestimated. The system was still running, but now it knew who had built it. Tuesday morning arrived with a different kind of quiet. Not the stillness of defeat, but of waiting like the inhale before a judge's verdict. The wind over Lake Muskoka was steady cold and precise, so was I. At 7:42 a.m., my phone lit up with a number I hadn't saved, but I recognized the area code. Downtown Toronto, NorthAxis HQ. I let it ring out. A few seconds later, an email arrived from Patrice Gagnon, the General Counsel. "Mr. Fraser, the board has completed its preliminary internal review. They request a formal conversation regarding your findings, your intentions, and your potential re-engagement with the company in a strategic capacity." Attached was a time 2:00 p.m. location boardroom level 42nd floor. Tone polite but veiled with urgency, I didn't answer right away. Instead, I brewed a fresh pot of tea and returned to the porch. Margaret joined me a few minutes later, wrapped in a wool shawl. She didn't ask what the call had been about. She didn't have to. I'd already told her how these things go, the panic, then the pivot, then the invitation back. They want you to fix it. She said after a while, "They want to survive," I replied. "Fixing it is just the price." At noon, I shaved, put on a navy blue suit I hadn't worn in 4 years, and packed a slim folder into a leather case. Inside was no documentation, just a printed list. 5 items, non-negotiable, by 1:54 p.m. I was stepping into the NorthAxis lobby again, for the first time since being escorted out like a ghost. The security guard at the front desk. Andrew Younger, nervous, looked up and did a double take. "Mr. Fraser," he said, blinking. "Welcome back," I nodded. "Visitor badge, please." He handed it to me with both hands like it might crack if he didn't. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor was silent. Polished chrome fake jazz, and my own reflection staring back at me with calm calculation. When I stepped into the boardroom, every seat was already filled. Oliver Chan gave a tight nod. Patrice sat to his left. fingers laced on a closed legal pad, the interim CEO, a woman named Rochelle Bellamy, previously COO, offered a restrained smile. "Mr. Fraser," she began, "thank you for coming." I took the empty seat at the end of the table. Didn't speak, just let the silence stretch long enough for the first beads of discomfort to surface. "We've reviewed the documentation," Rochelle continued. "The board has unanimously agreed to move forward with a full financial audit. Key personnel are being suspended, pending investigation." "And the fraud?" I asked flatly. "Under external review," Patrice replied. "Law enforcement has been contacted. This is now a formal investigation." "Good. That wasn't what I was here for." Rochelle cleared her throat. "We'd like to discuss a proposal. The creation of a new executive role. Chief Information Security Officer, reporting directly to the board, independent budget, total oversight of infrastructure access control and digital procurement. We believe you're the only person qualified." I waited. Then I reached into my folder and slid a single page across the table. 5 conditions, all typed, all clear, unrestricted audit authority across every department. Absolute veto power over any third-party vendor contracts involving IT or finance. No reporting chain below the board. Direct access only. Independent budget allocation separate from IT or operations. Written board commitment to review and enforce all internal compliance mechanisms I deemed necessary. Rochelle skimmed it. Eyebrows raised by the third item. "These are unusual terms," she said. "So was embezzling $4-6 million under your nose," I said. My voice steady, the boardroom fell silent. Not defensive, not insulted, just calculating. They knew the storm had passed, but the foundation had cracked, and I was offering to rebuild it brick by brick on my terms. "You'll have our answer by end of day," Patrice said finally. "You'll have my decision by noon tomorrow," I replied, standing. "If your answer matches mine." On the elevator ride down, I felt nothing, no triumph, no bitterness, just focus. At 3:22 p.m., as I drove north out of the city, I received a text from Oliver. "They're signing it. All 5. You just rewrote the architecture." I pulled over on the side of the highway, stared out at the horizon, and smiled slightly. This wasn't just a return. It was a reset. Wednesday morning arrived with frost on the ground and no illusions left in the air. I didn't need an alarm. I'd woken up at 5:16 a.m. naturally. Like my body already knew what the day would require: clarity control and not a trace of hesitation. By 6:40 I was dressed in the same navy suit, no tie this time. Just a clean white shirt, cuffed precisely. The kind of look that says, "I'm not here to impress you. I'm here because you need me." Margaret stood in the doorway of the cabin holding a thermos of hot coffee. "You're not nervous," she said, more observation than question. "No," I answered. "Not anymore, because they gave you what you wanted." I looked at her because they finally understood what they needed. The drive to Toronto was smooth. No music, just highway, and thought I pulled into the underground garage of the NorthAxis Tower at 9:02 a.m. This time there was no visitor badge, no front desk check-in. Security met me at the elevator and scanned me through directly to the executive access floor, floor 45. I'd never been there before. Few had. It wasn't just a level, it was a firewall. The final layer between public image and operational truth. The boardroom on that floor was different. No windows, no press photos, just a long obsidian table, 10 high-back chairs, and a white screen where silence projected better than any slideshow. Everyone was already seated. Oliver, Patrice, Rochelle, 2 members of the audit committee. None of them stood when I walked in, but they all waited until I sat before speaking. "Mr. Fraser." Rochelle said formally, "The board has approved all 5 conditions." Patrice slid a bound agreement across the table. I opened it, scanned, initialed the corners once per section, then closed it and set it back down. Your title will be Chief Information Security Officer. She continued, reporting only to the board. We've set your budget equal to legal and R&D combined. You will have discretionary control over personnel selections. I already have my first, I said. Stephen Lin, he'll head operational oversight. I'll train him myself. He knows the systems. More importantly, he still knows how to ask questions. Oliver smiled faintly. Patrice took notes. Rochelle simply nodded. We'll release an internal memo by Friday. No public announcement, she said. Good, I replied. Public isn't the problem. Weak internal governance is. There were no congratulations, no speeches, no red ribbon moment. Just signatures, acknowledgement, and execution. That's how real change begins, not with applause, but with accountability. By noon, I was in my new office, corner view, glass walls, and a nameplate that read, E. Fraser, CISO. Stephen walked in at 12:17 with a notepad and a nervous smile. You really came back, he said. I didn't come back, I replied. I came to finish building what I started. We spent 2 hours reviewing access logs, legacy patches, and shadow credentials still embedded in the back end. Most of the old team had gone silent when I was terminated, but now emails were trickling in, subject lines like "Welcome back and need help remapping compliance chains." It wasn't celebration. It was relief. By 4:30 p.m., I'd already locked out 7 dormant admin accounts, including one that Sebastian had left quietly embedded into a beta environment. It had sat there for months untouched, but it could have done damage if left alone. I shut it down permanently. At 5:06, I sent my first memo to the board. Initial vulnerability sweep complete, legacy risks being remapped. Recommend quarterly system integrity review, off the record offline. Eyes only, first one begins next Monday. I didn't wait for approval, I didn't need to, they had signed the terms. Now they'd see them applied. That evening, I stood in front of the large glass window, looking over the Toronto skyline lights, flickering across the towers, each office glowing like a separate story. Behind me, Margaret's reflection appeared on the glass. She'd come up to meet me after work. Is it everything you thought it would be? She asked softly. No, I said. It's quieter, but that's good. Quiet means the system is holding. She smiled and I paused, then said, I'm not angry anymore. I'm not even proud. I'm finished. That's better. As we left the building, I passed the main lobby desk again. Andrew, the young guard, waved this time. See you tomorrow, Mr. Fraser. Maybe, maybe not, because some returns aren't permanent. They're just the cleanup phase. And when the system finally learns how to defend itself, the architect can walk away quietly, completely, and without a single line of code left unguarded. I didn't set out to expose anyone. That's the part people never understand. When you work in systems long enough, you stop thinking in revenge and start thinking in risks. Patterns, integrity, points, failure, thresholds. You don't ask who did this to me. You ask what did they compromise and how deep does it go? What happened at NorthAxis wasn't just a fraud scheme. It was a case study in what happens when people stop listening to the people who build the foundations. They silenced the one person who remembered the original architecture. Because they thought modern strategy meant newer voices, louder slides, and consultant credentials. They forgot that systems don't reward charisma, they reward clarity, consistency, discipline. But let me be clear about something. This story isn't about getting a better title or a bigger office. It's about knowing when to speak and when to let the evidence speak for you. I never raised my voice, never leaked a story to the press. I simply documented, connected, and waited. Because truth doesn't need a spotlight to matter. It just needs to land where it can't be ignored. And if you're someone out there, an engineer, a nurse, a teacher, a manager, someone who's been told you're too old, school too slow, too quiet, Let me remind you, consistency isn't weakness, silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's the system rebooting, watching, waiting for the moment it needs to remind the world who built it. They thought I was gone. But the truth is, I never left. If this story hit a little too close to home, if you've ever been the one they tried to erase quietly, if you've ever been underestimated simply because you weren't loud about your value, then you're not alone. You don't need to scream to be heard. You just need to be ready when the silence breaks. Subscribe if you believe in stories where patience is power, where the quiet ones don't just survive, they rebuild the system. Comment below. If you've ever had to walk away in silence knowing full well you'd return on your terms, and share this, because maybe someone else out there is sitting in the shadows right now. Just waiting for the moment they were built for. Justice doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it enters the room. With a login only one person remembers.